My fiancé kept pushing for a third person in our relationship while I was pregnant. Turns out he had an 18-year-old girlfriend and no job. I, 31F, never imagined I would be writing this post. The past 2 years of my life feel like a blur, and I need outside perspective because I honestly don't know if I'm overreacting anymore. I'm currently living with my parents, taking care of our 8-month-old daughter while my fiancé lives 3 hours away in the city where we first met. I met Jake, 29M, not his real name, at a friend's housewarming party 2 years ago. I had just gotten out of a toxic relationship and wasn't looking for anything serious, but Jake was different from anyone I'd dated before. He was charming, attentive, and seemed to have his life together. He had a good job in tech, his own place, and talked about wanting to settle down and start a family. We hit it off immediately, and despite the distance, we made it work. He would drive down every other weekend, and I would visit him when I could. 6 months into our relationship, I got pregnant. It wasn't planned, I was on birth control, but I had been on antibiotics for a sinus infection which apparently made them less effective. When I told Jake, he was surprisingly excited. He proposed 2 weeks later, saying he had been planning to do it anyway, and this just made the timing perfect. My parents were hesitant about how quick everything was moving, but they saw how happy I was and welcomed Jake into the family. The pregnancy was rough from the start. I had severe morning sickness and complications that made it difficult to work full-time. My job as a dental assistant required me to be on my feet all day, and I started having dizzy spells. After a particularly bad fall at work, my doctor recommended bed rest. That's when Jake suggested I move in with my parents temporarily. It made sense, they lived closer to my doctor, and I needed the support since Jake couldn't be there daily due to his job. At first, everything seemed perfect. Jake would visit every other weekend, bring me my favorite snacks, and talk about our future together. We started planning the wedding for after the baby was born, and my mom was thrilled to help with the preparations. She and Jake got along great. He would help her in the garden during his visits and always brought her favorite coffee. The problems started subtly. Around my 4th month of pregnancy, Jake began bringing up the topic of polyamory. I'm bisexual, and early in our relationship, we had one casual conversation about past experiences. I mentioned that I had been in a poly relationship in college, but it wasn't for me. I thought that was the end of it. But Jake kept bringing it up, especially during his visits. He would show me pictures of women he met at work or through friends, asking what I thought about them. At first, I thought he was just making conversation, but it became a pattern. He would say things like how this girl from his office was interested in poly relationships, or how his friend's sister thought I was cute and would love to get to know me better. I tried to be clear about my feelings. I explained that while I respect polyamory as a lifestyle choice, it wasn't something I wanted, especially not while pregnant and planning our wedding. Jake would seem to understand, but then bring it up again the next time he visited. When I was 7 months pregnant and dealing with severe morning sickness, he spent an entire visit talking about a new employee at his company who was experienced with poly relationships. I was literally throwing up between conversations, and he was showing me this girl's Instagram profile, talking about how we would all get along great. I broke down crying, telling him I felt pressured and disrespected. He apologized and promised to drop it until after the baby was born. But things only got worse after our daughter Lily was born. The first few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and recovery from a difficult delivery. Jake took a week off work to help, but spent most of the time on his phone. He started making excuses to cut his weekend visits short, saying he had work emergencies or family obligations. Then I discovered he was meeting an 18-year-old girl behind my back. Her name is Madison, and apparently, they met at a coffee shop where she works. I found out when she accidentally sent a Snapchat meant for him to me. They had similar usernames. The message was flirtatious, talking about how much fun they had together the previous weekend, a weekend Jake had told me he needed to work. When I confronted him, he claimed they were just friends and that I was being paranoid. But then I discovered they'd been messaging constantly for months. He even visited her house after dropping me off at my parents' place one day, saying he was going home but instead spent 5 hours with her. When I asked about this, he said they were just talking about books and music, and that I was being controlling by monitoring his friendships. Last night was the final straw. I discovered he's been active on multiple dating apps, with profiles clearly stating he's in an open relationship and looking for a third partner. When I confronted him, his response made me feel sick. He said he was just keeping his options open and that I was being controlling by not letting him explore his sexuality. He actually suggested that adding another person to our relationship would help with childcare and household expenses. I feel completely lost and betrayed. My parents have been incredibly supportive, letting me and Lily live with them while I get back on my feet. They've turned their home office into a nursery and help with Lily whenever they can. I recently got a job offer at a new dental practice that could help me become financially independent, but I'm scared to tell my parents about what's really going on with Jake. My mom especially adores him. She's already ordered sample wedding invitations and talks constantly about how lucky Lily is to have such a devoted father. My dad seems less convinced, but he keeps his opinions to himself to keep the peace. I don't know what to do anymore. Part of me wants to believe Jake when he says he loves me and wants to marry me, but his actions show otherwise. He keeps saying I'm enough for him, but then why is he constantly looking for other women? Am I wrong for not wanting to share my fiancé while I'm raising our daughter? Every time I look at Lily, I feel a mix of love and anxiety. She deserves better than this uncertainty, better than a father who puts his desires above his family's stability. I've tried talking to Jake about focusing on our family, but he turns it around and accuses me of trapping him or not being open-minded enough. I need advice. Should I end things now before we get married? Should I try to make it work for Lily's sake? I'm tired of crying myself to sleep while he's out there living his best life and treating our relationship like it's nothing. Please help me see this clearly because right now, I feel like I'm drowning. Update 1. It's been 2 weeks since my last post, and I wish I could say things have improved, but everything has gotten so much worse. I want to thank everyone who commented on my original post. Your support and advice gave me the courage to finally confront Jake about everything, though I honestly wish I hadn't. The truth was more devastating than I imagined. Jake came to visit last weekend, supposedly to discuss our relationship. I had asked him to come early so we could talk while Lily was napping. He showed up 3 hours late, claiming traffic was bad, even though my friend who lives in his city said the roads were clear. I should have known then that something was off. I had prepared everything I wanted to say. I put Lily down for her nap, made coffee, and even wrote down my points so I wouldn't get sidetracked by his excuses. But before I could start, he dropped a bombshell that made everything else irrelevant. He's already in a relationship with Madison, the 18-year-old from the coffee shop. They've been seeing each other for months, and he wants her to be part of our family. He actually suggested she could move in with us after we get married. I sat there, holding my coffee mug so tight my knuckles turned white, listening as he described their relationship. How they connected over music and books. How she understands him in ways I never could. How she's more open-minded and free-spirited. The entire time he was talking, all I could think about was how I'd been up 3 times the night before with Lily, who's teething, while he was building a relationship with someone barely out of high school. The worst part wasn't his confession, it was his justification. He said Madison is more understanding because she doesn't have the responsibilities of motherhood weighing her down. He actually suggested that my hormones and the stress of being a new mom were making me closed-minded and possessive. When I reminded him that I'm the one taking care of our daughter while he plays house with a teenager, he had the audacity to say that I chose to be a mom, and he's still young and needs to explore his options. Then came the second bombshell. During this conversation, my mom came home early from her book club. She overheard part of our discussion and seemed confused. That's when I discovered that Jake had already introduced Madison to my parents, without my knowledge. Apparently, during one of his visits when I was at a doctor's appointment with Lily, he brought Madison over and introduced her to my mom as his work colleague who was interested in wedding planning. My mom had mentioned meeting a sweet young girl who worked with Jake, but I had been so busy with Lily that I didn't connect the dots. Mom said they spent an hour looking at wedding magazines together, with Madison giving suggestions for color schemes and venues. The whole time, my mom thought she was just a friendly coworker helping with wedding plans. She even added Madison on Facebook and had been liking her posts. I couldn't hold back anymore. With my mom standing there, I told her everything, the dating apps, the lies, the manipulation. I showed her the messages where Jake was actively looking for other partners while I was up all night with our daughter. My mom's face went from confusion to horror to anger. She had been one of Jake's biggest supporters, always defending him to my dad, who had suspicions from the start. It turns out my dad had noticed things, how Jake would step outside for long phone calls during visits, how he always seemed more interested in his phone than his daughter, how he would make excuses to leave early or arrive late. But Dad kept quiet because he didn't want to upset me while I was adjusting to motherhood. He remembered how hard my previous breakup had been and didn't want to add to my stress without concrete proof. Jake's response to all this? He says I'm being dramatic and that plenty of people make poly relationships work. He started listing couples we know who have open relationships, completely missing the point that those relationships are based on mutual consent and trust, not lies and manipulation. When I called him out on introducing Madison to my mom under false pretenses, he said he was just waiting for the right time to tell me. The final straw was when I asked about his commitment to Lily. He said he'd always support her financially but needed to be true to himself and his desires. He even suggested that having Madison around would be good for Lily, she could help with childcare since she loves kids. The idea of him trying to replace me with a teenager as our daughter's caregiver made me physically sick. I haven't slept properly in days. Every time I look at Lily, I feel a mixture of love and sadness. How do I explain to her when she's older that her father chose his desires over his family? That he thought it was okay to introduce random women into her life without her mother's knowledge or consent? My parents are being incredibly supportive now that they know the truth. Mom has gone from being Jake's biggest fan to his harshest critic. She's already called the wedding planner to cancel everything and is helping me look into family lawyers. But I can see the pity in their eyes, and it kills me. They wanted so much better for me and Lily. Jake keeps texting, alternating between apologizing and accusing me of ruining his life by turning my parents against him. He says if I were truly bisexual, I would understand his need for exploration. He's trying to use my sexuality against me, and it's making me question everything about our relationship. Was any of it real? Or was he just waiting for the right moment to push for what he really wanted? Update 2. A month has passed since my last update, and I've discovered even more lies that make everything before seem mild in comparison. Remember how Jake said he'd always support our daughter financially? Well, I found out he quit his job 2 months ago and never told me. All those work trips where he claimed he couldn't visit us? He was actually staying with Madison and her roommates, playing house while I struggled to care for our daughter. The truth came out in the most unexpected way. His mother called me last week, worried because Jake had asked to borrow a significant amount of money. She thought it was strange since he had always been financially stable. When she pressed him about it, he gave vague answers about temporary setbacks and investment opportunities. During our conversation, it became clear she had no idea about our problems or his relationship with Madison. She thought we were still happily planning our wedding. When I told her everything, she broke down crying. But then she revealed something that made my blood run cold. This isn't the first time Jake has done this. Apparently, 3 years ago, he was engaged to another woman named Sarah. Their story is eerily similar to mine. He pushed for a poly relationship, claiming his fiancé was too closed-minded when she refused. He started seeing another woman behind her back, gradually spent less time at home, and eventually abandoned his responsibilities completely. The only difference is they didn't have a child together. His mom got Sarah's contact information from old family records and encouraged me to reach out to her. Sarah responded to my Facebook message within hours. She warned me that Jake would never change, that he uses polyamory as an excuse to cheat without guilt. She told me how he manipulated her, made her feel crazy for having normal boundaries, and tried to turn her family against her when she finally ended things. The similarities between our stories are frightening. Sarah mentioned how Jake would love bomb her after arguments, promising to change while simultaneously continuing his behavior. He used the same lines about being true to himself and exploring his sexuality. He even introduced his other girlfriend to her family under false pretenses, just like he did with Madison. With this new information, I started digging deeper. I discovered Jake hasn't just quit his job, he was actually asked to leave. Through mutual friends, I learned he had been skipping work regularly and using company resources to manage his dating profiles. When confronted by his supervisor, he claimed he was dealing with family emergencies related to Lily. He used our daughter as an excuse while he was actually spending time with Madison. I also found out he's been lying about his financial situation. Those child support payments he promised? He hasn't made a single one. The money he claimed was going into a college fund for Lily was actually being spent on dates and gifts for Madison. He even used part of his severance package to take her on a weekend trip to the beach, the same weekend he told me he couldn't visit because of a work emergency. I've decided to file for full custody and child support. My parents are helping me with the legal costs, and my dad connected me with a family lawyer who specializes in cases like mine. When I told Jake about the custody filing, he finally showed some real emotion, anger. He exploded, accusing me of trying to ruin his life and turn our daughter against him. The same daughter he hasn't seen in weeks because he's been too busy with his new life. His reaction was telling. He wasn't angry about potentially losing time with Lily, he was angry about being exposed. He ranted about how I had no right to talk to his mother or Sarah, how I was invading his privacy by discovering his lies. When I mentioned his job loss and the missing child support payments, he actually tried to blame me, saying the stress of my unreasonable demands had affected his work performance. The most painful part? During his rant, he mentioned that Madison is now having doubts about their relationship. Apparently, finding out he's unemployed and lying about supporting his child has made her question things. He blamed me for this too, saying I was poisoning everyone against him just because I couldn't handle his authentic self. Update 3. 6 months have passed since my original post, and I want to share how everything turned out. The custody hearing was last month, and it was both better and worse than I expected. Jake didn't show up, claiming he had car trouble, But his teenage girlfriend Madison did, and what happened next shocked everyone in the courtroom. Madison stood up and asked to speak. She revealed that Jake had been living with her and her roommates for the past 3 months, telling them I was the one pushing for polyamory and that he was the victim of my jealousy and possessiveness. She found out the truth when she discovered messages on his phone to other women on dating apps, realizing he was trying to do to her what he did to me. She told the court how Jake had lied about everything: his job, his relationship with Lily, and his intentions for our future. He had told her I was keeping him from seeing Lily, when in reality he was skipping his scheduled visits to go on dates with other women. The final straw for her was finding out he had used her student loan money to buy gifts for another girl he was pursuing. The judge granted me full custody with supervised visitation rights for Jake. He hasn't attempted to use these rights even once. Instead, he posts on social media about how the court system is biased against fathers and how I've turned everyone against him. His latest post was about how he's a victim of close-minded people who don't understand modern relationships. His mother has become an unexpected source of support. She still keeps in touch and helps with Lily when she can. She's trying to make up for her son's failures, and honestly, Lily adores her grandmother. We have Sunday dinners together, and she's helping me create a baby book for Lily, filling it with photos and memories so my daughter will know she's loved, even if her father chose to walk away. My new job at the dental practice is going well. My boss is understanding about my situation and allows me flexible hours to accommodate Lily's needs. I've even started taking online courses to become a dental hygienist, which will mean better pay and more stable hours. My parents have been incredible through all of this. The pity in their eyes has been replaced with pride as they watch me rebuild my life. My dad, who rarely shows emotion, teared up last week when Lily took her first steps. He said he was proud of how strong I've been, handling everything with grace despite Jake's betrayal. As for Jake? Last I heard through mutual friends, he's already found another girlfriend, a 20-year-old college student, and is probably feeding her the same lines about being open-minded and free-spirited. He posts cryptic messages on social media about finding his true self and how some people are too limited in their thinking to understand his journey. Madison reached out to me recently. She's in therapy now, processing everything that happened. She warned me that Jake is telling his new girlfriend a completely different version of our story, painting himself as the victim of 2 crazy exes who couldn't handle his honesty about wanting an open relationship. But none of that matters anymore. Lily is thriving, hitting all her milestones and bringing joy to everyone around her. I've learned that being a single mom isn't the tragedy I once feared it would be. It's better than watching your child grow up thinking it's normal for one parent to lie and manipulate the other. I won't say it's always easy. There are nights when Lily cries for longer than usual, and I wish I had a partner to share the load. But then I remember the anxiety and pain of my life with Jake, and I know we're better off now. My daughter deserves to grow up in a home filled with honesty and stability, even if that home doesn't include her father. Thank you, Reddit, for helping me see the truth when I was too close to the situation to see it clearly. To anyone going through something similar, trust your gut. If someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time.